Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we are looking at chapter 11 of book 1, and we're coming near the conclusion. We have two more chapters after this of the first book of Politics 1, which deals with the household to most sense. And today we're going to kind of be dealing with the question of what is necessary for, knowledge of acquisitions. Which is interesting. In other words, he really hasn't addressed the household, the other relations of the household. He did with the first relationship. Now, at chapter 3, he brings up that the household, the polis, is an association of households, and he defines the household as three relationships: that of the master servant, husband, wife, parent, child. And the focus was on the household, but then it went and he therefore discussed in order parent, master slave, and this leads to discussion of slavery, whether slavery is by nature or not, whether it is how is it different from politics and different like this. This is whether the question of what is the slave, what is um, and this discussion of slavery was rather long. It's chapter 4 or 5 in 6, I think it's 7 also. And then what happens is the discussion of the idea that slavery and mastery, the art of mastery, is not the art of making money. Therefore, this is the other thing. As the house, it leads us to the question of money making, the art of getting goods, getting slaves, right? And then he talks about the question of acquisition. What is the point of acquisition? What are the forms of acquisition? So and the questions of acquisition and getting money, right? So that is last couple of chapters we looked at the question of acquisition, and last chapter we looked at the question of interest making, right? The question of interest making. Now he's continuing this theme here a little bit in chapter 11. Since we have discussed adequately what relates to knowledge, what relates to utility must be treated. So therefore, interest making and these things in other words, we've dealt with what relates to knowledge about those discussion of money making and that. Now we have to talk about utility, what is useful regarding this. All things of this sort have room for a free sort of study, but experience in them is a necessity. In other words, you can study these things in a free sense you can apply this and as study this and as a kind of inquiry, but to really know about money making and these things, you need, in other words, that experience in them is necessary. The useful part of the art of getting goods are to be experienced regarding livestock. What sort are the most profitable, in which places and under which conditions, for example, what sort of horses or cattle or sheep ought to be kept, and similarly with the other animals. For one needs to be experienced as regards those that are the most preferable, both compared to one another and in particular places, since different kinds thrive in different areas. Okay, so therefore this is a big long clause right here. Right? So therefore, under what conditions? And certain animals thrive in some areas. Some animals, what animals are able to be more conducive to survive and work and be effective? You have to, it requires knowledge of the particulars, a lot of knowledge of the particular, and experience with the animals. The idea of, and particularly if you're going to be making, this is the handling of them that they're going to be exchanged, traded, developing, growing them, making them, and then exchanging them, right? This is that double sense of this thing, right? Um, Next, regarding farming. So therefore, this is the horse gather. This is livestock, right? Knowledge of this is also responding, the question of, okay, I'm going to be dealing with livestock. Okay, I'm going to sell livestock, trade it. But that's also livestock. Livestock is like this, and this is another art. Like it requires a different art, subordinate art. And he continues like this. He says the farmer, right? And next, regarding farming, both of grain and fruit, and especially regarding beekeeping and raising of other animals, whether fish or fowl, from which it is possible to derive benefit. In other words, you can derive benefit from it. In other words, you're able that if you produce, you grain, you produce something, and it's done for benefit. Okay. In other words, it requires experience, work, and understanding of this thing. So in other words, this is the practical science in the sense, practical art. Farming, both of grain and fruit. Now, and finally, regarding beekeeping and other forms of animals, right, either fish or fowl, this is are able to derive benefit. Of the art of getting goods in its most proper sense, then, these are the parts and primary elements. Of the art of, therefore, this is the necessary, this is like the art of getting goods of like animals, food, necessary things, food, getting animals to eat or to produce them or to use them as labor instruments of I'm going to use the animals for food to eat, consume, or else to help me with labor, using that as a means of of working servicing as an animal a thing to help me move stuff, travel stuff, whatever. This is the point about this. Eat or use for cows for milking and chickens for eggs laying, right? All this is kind of like fish. You can do this again, fish to make what for eating, fish and fowl, birds like this. All this together comes what he says as kind of the action of and then bee for beekeeping and the honey that comes from it, right? All of this is kind of a form of getting goods that helps us. These goods are those that are necessary goods for sustenance, right? Now, of the art of exchange, in other words, he says the art of getting goods in the proper sense. Then these are the parts and the primary elements. So therefore, like the farmer, that and the raiser of animals and the carrying animals, livestock. This is what he says here, right? And then he goes of the art of exchange, the greatest part is trade, of which there are three parts: the provision of ships, transport, and marketing. So therefore, the provision of ships, transport, and marketing. These differ from each other by the fact that some are safer while others provide great remuneration, more riskier. The marketing is figuring out what's going on. This idea of exchange. In other words, the provisioning of a ship that is making for a ship ready to go out there. The transport of it, there's people who are carrying it and moving it back and forth. And marketing is the people who deal with the selling of it, like in that sense. Um, the second is money lending. So therefore, the first is this. There are three parts. One is this: provisioning, ships, transport, and marketing. Right, that's the one. The second is money lending, and the third is wage labor. That is that of which one sort involves workers' arts, while the other is performed by those who lack any art but are useful only with their bodies. So therefore, this is the three things. Right? He says this, like this thing. The second is money lending, and one is of an art, a worker's art, and while the other one is provided. So what is that? 48. This is perhaps the least misleading English equivalent of the untranslatable banos, which renders by vulgar or mechanical. In other words, banos, this is a famous one, often is vulgar or mechanical. The reference is to class of artisans who work indoors and with their hands as repetitive tasks, and as in factory work. There was a powerful prejudice against such person in the contemporary Greek world of that, and they were often excluded from full citizenship. Strikingly, Aristotle suggests that they have less virtue even than slaves, whose work was mostly menial. Okay, right? And see, it says particularly C5 that this is even worse than slaves in that sense. This repetitive, the bodily labors, our bodies work. Um, there is a third kind of art of getting good. Okay, so therefore that's this. This is the second. What is the third is labor, right? Um, he says there is a third kind of art of getting good between this and the first. since it has become part, it has, since it has some part of some part, okay, some part, both of this the sort that is according to nature in the art of exchange. This dealing with things from the earth and unfruitful, but useful things that grow from the earth, and including activities such as lumbering and every sort of mining. So therefore, this is an unnatural, but this is at one level. What this is weird. He says there is this another form of getting goods, kind of tied between the first and the second, the first and the third types, right? Of this, of the artificial side. In other words, this between the two types of getting goods, between this one and the first one. That's this natural one, right? Of getting that which deals with things from nature, but unfruitful, but the things useful that grows from the earth, including something as lumbering, tree mining. Now, this covers many different types, as there are many different types of things mixed from the earth. So again, this is a kind of another aspect of this that he's trying to highlight. That there's another thing, mining, taking things from the earth. This is even this is more preferable than to money lending or even this physical labor, right? A general account has now been given of each of these things. A detailed and exact discussion would be useful in undertaking the works themselves, but to spend much time on such things is crude. In other words, he's not going to. A general account has been given of these things. A detailed account would be useful, but such to spend such time on this is crude, rude, vulgar might be right. The most artful of these works are those which involve chance the least. So the most artful of these kind of labors and these things are least chance. The most vulgar, those in which the body is the most damaged. The most slavish, those in which the body is the most used. The most ignoble, those which are least in need of virtue. So therefore, this is to understand that these kind of things, and is the hierarchy here, is what that the highest is that which that the most artful is those which involve chance, accident, the least, right? The most vulgar are those which the body is the most damage, labor does the body damage. The most vulgar, in other words, the most low or vulgar in that sense, crude, bodily, vulgar in that sense. The most slavish is those which the body is most used, and the most ignoble are those which need the least virtue. Right? That's the end thing. Some have written on these matters, as Chereparos and Apollodorus of Lemos, on farming both of grain and fruit, for example, and other things. They may be studied there by anyone concerned with them. And that's also true of the Roman writer, the famous Roman writer Cato, and other these famous Pliny and other writers of the Roman world talk about farming and things like this. In other words, he says that they may be studied any concern with them. But in addition, has been said various places concerning the ways some have succeeded in getting goods should be collected. Now, 49 is this thing. The work of Apollodorus is cited and used in agriculture writings of Varro and Pliny. Caros as Chares is otherwise unknown. The suggestion concerning collecting accounts of success in money making appears to be taken up in the second book of the Economics, which is some people argue is Aristotle, some people say it's not. Okay, let's go here back here to here. For all these things are useful for those who honor the art of getting goods. So all these kind of things, this knowledge about these kind of things, but this knowledge about this, it's useful for those who honor the art of getting goods. There is, for example, the scheme of Thales of Milos. This is money. This is a money-making scheme that is a tribute to him on account of his wisdom. Yet it happens to be a general application. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Go back here. Let's go back for a second. I want to go to the note because the note is important here. This is Thales. This is the famous Thales account. Is the Greek philosopher of the 6th century. Now it's going to be um, money making. Here is 51. It's going to be the word kleremeskon. This is the money and making of money. Now, this money making scheme of Thales is accompanied by his wisdom, sophos, right? Yet it happens to be general in application. For they say that when someone on account of his they say when someone on account of his poverty approached him with the uselessness of his philosophy, Thales observing uh, uh, through his knowledge of astronomy that there would be a good harvest of olives, was able during the winter to raise a small amount of money to place in deposit on all the olive presses in both Miletus and Chios, which he could hire at a low rate because no one was competing with him. Then, when the season came, many of them were suddenly in demand at the same time. He hired them on what terms he pleased and gained a great deal of money, thus showing how easy it would be for a philosopher to become wealthy if they so wished. But it is not. But it is not this they are serious about. Right, the philosophers could be wealthy if they wanted to. Their knowledge could do it, but they're not serious about this. Right. This is that 52. Again, Clemata. In other words, this a great deal of really money, wealth in that sense. But he could be. He could. In other words, he made this is and this is a Thales then is said to have made a display of his wisdom in this manner, though, as we said, this piece of art of money making is universal. If someone is able to establish a monopoly for himself, thus even some cities raise revenue in this way when they are short of money. They establish a monopoly on things being sold. In Sicily, a man used some money deposited with him to buy all the iron from the iron foundries. When the traders came from their trading places, he alone had it to sell. And though he did not greatly increase the price, he made 100 talents profits out of original 50. When Dionysius heard of this, he ordered him to take his money and leave Syracuse on the ground that he had discovered a way of raising revenue that was harmful for Dionysius' affair. Now, uh, I'm not sure whether this is Dionysius I or Dionysius II, but the idea was that this was a threat to him. In other words, he found a raise of money that was a threat to him. He made a huge profit. And that mean, yet the insight was the same as Thales. For both, for both artfully arranged a monopoly for themselves. It is useful for political rulers also to be familiar with these things. For many cities stand in need of money making and revenues of the sort, just as householders do, yet more so. Thus, there are some, even among those engaged in politics, who are concerned only in these matters. Now, this is 56. Aristotle may be particularly thinking particularly in contemporary Athenian politician Ubilus. Some have suspected this chapter of being a later interpolation movement. Says this: the chief difficulty is that this seems to undercut the critique of money making in the preceding chapters. Right? In other words, this is the problem. In other words, this is a kind of aspect. Now, the question here is its usefulness for the city. I would argue that there is a contradiction, but the critique of money making for its own sake, and that's private money making. Here he's talking about the usefulness for the city, that this is a useful thing for the city. It is providing city with the revenues it needs, and therefore the revenues do what? Provide for the necessary things, and also the security of the city, and the means that the city is able to secure itself and also to live well. And this is, in other words, it's not the difference between the individual money maker making it for himself. Okay, this is a never ending and hard, but this is, in other words, if this is the only thing he does, then that's not good enough. This also comes to come. This is why if you're going to be wealthy like this, you need to be not lib. This is why the art of magnificence in the ethics, right? One of the ethical counts of the virtues of it's liberality is about spending money and generosity. Liberality is money regarding spending money on individuals, whereas the larger money being spent for the sake of the city, magnificence. This is the virtue of knowing how to spend money for the sake of the city, and this is the virtue. Therefore, these arts are the money. It's not. In other words, this is not being done for its own sake. Now, to see the purpose again. Why did Thales do it? Thales did it because he was embarrassed. He wanted to show that his knowledge was not useless, and it was his pride who led him to do this, to show, to demonstrate. But then again, he says that philosophers can do this, but they don't because because they have the knowledge, but this is making money is not what is serious for them. Okay, that's the whole point of that discussion. But the concern of this is useful for political persons. Why? Because this is not this monopolies are means of revenue that are necessary, and revenue is a thing that is going to be necessary for a city in order for it to survive. And this is not necessarily, again, I think this is the other thing. I think the money making thing was more concerned about the household at that level. Now, here, the scope changes from the effects of the household to the effects of the city. So that could be a shift too. In other words, does the criticism of house unlimited money is tied to the relationships of the household? We're going to end this chapter here in that sense, right? And he says that those people who concern with politics needs to be aware of these things. This is how he ends the chapter. We end the discussion of good getting. So therefore, we had this huge discussion about money making, good getting, the sources of sustenance, the sources of what is good, the types of making of money, the dangers of interest. But then here he had this whole discussion of monopoly, right? Of this ability of what it is. Now here we end again. I think again we'll stop here, and next we'll turn to chapter 12, which returns us back to the discussion of the household, to the other two parts that he promised to talk about, but didn't, that of husband, wife, parent, child. So we'll stop here. If you have any questions, put the comments down here below, and when I see them, I will respond to them. If you like it, dislike it, say why. If you share this, share with a friend, share this one, subscribe so that you can get the updates of what's coming up next. Also, if you want to follow me on social media, you can follow the information below. If you're going to you want to help, of course, I think there's only one or two people who are members. It's not like I've done anything at the Subscribe Star and Patreon. But if you want to help me, you can become a Patreon or a Subscribe Star. There's not many people, but maybe 5 or 6 people watching. This is really depressing. I'm not that popular. This is my book I've recently done. If you want to help me now, you can buy this. You can go buy my other books, but I don't get the money from this. This one I made. This is really designed to help students. This is a study guide. This is like Cliff Notes on Aristotle's Politics. It's a workbook on Aristotle, a notebook on Aristotle's Politics, a workbook. This is a study guide. It's not a commentary, not interpretation. It helps you go through the politics. It's not even a mere summary. It's kind of a work study. It looks at every section of it. It offers charts. It breaks up the text in certain ways. It offers some useful categorizations to try to figure out the various themes when they are themes. It's book by book, chapter by chapter. At the end of every book, there's places we can take notes. It's the largest we can take notes. It's worth having. It's about $30. I understand it's a little pricey. This is not to be read in substitute of the politics. It is perfectly. It's a useful guide to guide you through it. Um, Again, so therefore, that's the way you can help and contribute if you want. Okay, that's it. Well, take care and have a good day. Bye bye.